Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. So this video, I've just chopped down the full length video into 3 chunks, so they're all a little bit more manageable rather than a 20-minute sit through. So if you want to watch it all, I'll attach a link below, but if not, here's part 1 where we talk about miniature scale. So today we're going to be talking about the crazy world of scale in the miniature wargaming hobby. So I mean, most of us, when we hear scale, we think of 28mm, 15mm, etc. But then you've also got the fractions, so 1 to 76, 1 to 252, etc. That's just the miniatures themselves. You've then also got the scale of your scenery. So does a house represent a house? Does it represent a farmstead, a town? And how does that interact with your miniatures? And then we've got the next range, or scale, which is the ranges of the weapon systems. So again, are we looking for historically accurate representations of the firearms? In which case you're going to need quite large tables. Or are we looking to drum it all down and shrink it into a much smaller area where we lose the realism, but perhaps we have more playability? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And part 1, we're going to be going over the minis themselves. So first we're going to talk about miniature scale, and you obviously have the larger scales. So larger scales are 28mm and above, in my opinion. So that's going to be 28mm, 32, 54 and larger. And that's what these chaps are. So that's your typical Space Marine, Lord of the Rings figures, and most of the, so like the Perry miniatures are 28mm as well. So they've got their perks and they've also got their cons. So they have much higher detail and are great for precision painting. They're also good for skirmish games where you've got 30 to 50 minis per side being played at a sort of 1-to-1 scale, so one man represents one man. But the main downsides, as I see it, are the time and the cost to build the miniatures. So I mean, Space Marines are quite expensive now. I'm not sure what they're up to, but I'll have to double check, but I'm thinking up towards $50 for a box of 10, whereas when I was younger they used to be about 15 to 20, so it has gone up quite considerably. So that's one of the downsides. Plus, if you're trying to create large battles, if we're going with the more historical, then to have a regiment being represented by, say, 20 large figures doesn't really look accurate. It looks more like a mob moving forwards rather than a regiment being represented. That's just my opinion, but that's for me one of the cons. Also, with the larger scales you come into the issue of range of the weapons. And so if you want to have realistic ranges, pretty well everything is within range from turn 1. Anything on the table can be hit either by small arms fire or indirect fire. So your opportunities to really use tactics and maneuver are pretty well limited. I watch a lot of the videos on YouTube where it'll be the mega apocalypse battle, I don't know, 100,000 point army or something like that. And it looks really impressive, but it is literally the whole table edge crammed full of as many figures as you can get on the table, and yeah, then as soon as the big guns fire, whole chunks get wiped out, and you kind of think, it's cool, but it's not really tactical. So for me, that's a bit of a turn off, but hey, if you enjoy that sort of thing, it's great. So then the next scales are the sort of mid-range scales. And they're going to be your sort of 12mm up to about 20mm, in my opinion. You could go as far as sort of 25, which would be this chap. So 25, 20, or I think it's 1 to 76. That's 15mm, and then that's the Warlord Games, which I think they're like 12 point something. So with that sort of scale, you still get a pretty reasonable level of detail. It's not quite the same as you'd get on the larger, but now, I mean, you can kind of see the belts and things on these. It's pretty good. You can see all of his pouches. So the detail is still there, depending on how much effort you want to put into the miniatures. For this sort of scale, it is good, again, for a 1-for-1 representation. One man representing one man on the table. But due to the smaller scale of the miniatures, it's much easier to get a lot more troops onto the table. So you can still fight your skirmish games, but you can also go up to larger games. So if you think Flames of War, which are more, instead of platoon, they're more company level, this sort of scale is going to be better for that, at least in my opinion. At this sort of level again, you can go one man, one base, or you could do the sort of Flames of War where you have 5 or 6 men per base. That is really optional. That's entirely up to you and how you like to play your games. But it does give you that flexibility. I'd say the big bonus for this is the cost, though. I mean, with Plastic Soldier Company, I think it was, I'd have to double check and I'll put it in the comments, I think it's $25 for a box, and that came with about 3 platoons, well, I think it was about 120 figures. So you basically got an entire company for $20, whereas for a Space Marine, you're looking at about $50 for 10 miniatures. So there is that to take into account, just the quantity and scale that you get. Then when you want to build big mass battles, again, it just allows you to do that on the same size table as you would have for a 28mm, where you can't have any flexibility for maneuver. In the smaller scales, you do gain that. So that's pretty good if you're interested in that sort of thing. If you want to be more of a, you're not just recreating the historical battle as it was, but you want to try different techniques at Waterloo. Oh, why don't we try a flanking maneuver to the left, or why don't we do X, Y, or Z? Having that option with the smaller allows you to do that, so it's more, in my opinion, again, slightly more interesting. And then once we've done those, we then move to the micro, or at least I'd class them as micro scale, which is sort of 6mm and smaller. You could say 10mm and smaller. And again, these have pretty well the same perks as the medium scale, but they have the least amount of detail. So you can see on them, you can kind of see a few belts and things have been painted in, and from a distance you can tell, they're redcoats, they're British, white trousers, Peninsular War. You can see enough to know who they are supposed to be, but you're not going to go into the detail of even the Warlord Games epic battles. And if I don't have any, but if you had 28mm, again, your detail would go up drastically. Being in small scale, you get a lot more miniatures to the base. I think there's 24 on that base, as opposed to 20 on that one, and then singles on the rest. So you can get the mass of troops on the table and move them around a lot more easily. Same size table as I was saying for the 28, you would have plenty of space down at 6mm to be able to do whatever you wanted, so just create whole new options and tactics. Again, cost. These are cents per mini. I think it's like $5 for, might even be less than that, might even be like $3, or I can't remember. Anyway, very, very cheap. You're looking at a couple of cents per figure, rather than a couple of dollars per figure in the upper scales. So that's a definite bonus. So yeah, as I said, you've got pros and you've got cons for all of them. I would say for skirmishing, the bigger scale is best, and if you're large scale wargaming, the smaller, or if you just want to have one scale to try and do it all, then go for your mid-range, either 20 or 15. Before we leave talking about miniature scale, there is also another scale which people don't often talk about, and that's scale within the scale. So if you think of the Space Marine, in Warhammer lore, or 40,000 lore, they're supposed to be, I think, 7 to 10 feet. I think they're about 8 foot on average. And they always talk about a human coming up to about chest height. So if you have another 28mm human, they're not actually right, because they're the same head height. So you really need to be looking at a 20mm figure, just put that in there to represent the base, but a 20mm figure to sort of come up to his chest height. So within Games Workshop's own range, which is 28mm, their Imperial Guard are too large a scale to be accurate to the Space Marines. They're supposed to be smaller people compared to these super sized, super muscular super soldiers. So yeah, you would definitely, really, if you wanted to do it accurately, you'd need to use your Imperial Guard in a 20mm scale, possibly even 15, but I would say that would be going a little bit small. That would be more like a Primarch against a human. But just an interesting point. So if I were to do an Imperial Guard army, I would probably use sort of 20mm for my Imperial Guard, and maybe put 2 or 3 to a base, and then it would just sort of give you that impression. So thanks for watching, guys. Watch out for the next week where part 2 and 3 will come out. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.